Welcome to the Low Demand Parenting Podcast, where we drop the pressure, find the joy, and thrive, even when it feels like life is stuck on level 12 hard. I'm Amanda Diekman, author, autistic adult, and mom of 3. I'm not here as an expert, but a fellow traveler. Together, we're learning how to live more gently, authentically, and vibrantly in this wild parenting life. Hello, loves. Before we get into this wonderful episode with Robyn Gobbel, I want to tell you about a new program that's happening and enrolling right now, and it just might be exactly what you need in your life right now. It's called the Restore Your Soul Mastermind. And this is the 3rd time I've run it. And so I can confidently say that this is the deepest dive. It's the most intense, but also most transformative offering I've ever created. It's an intimate community of 15 parents who've all shared so much in common in terms of a really difficult parenting road that's changed pretty much everything about who you are and how you live your life. And together we're reorienting ourselves to our own vibrancy. There's so many spaces where we're focused on our kids, and this is a space where we're safe enough to talk about ourselves. It's about 6 months. It's a weekly group, and there's a virtual retreat at the center of it. And you guys, it's just really life-changing. If it's for you, we're enrolling right now. There are obviously a limited number of spots, so that if you're someone whose soul is desperately in need of renewal, that you might find your way into the group. All right, let's jump into my conversation with Robyn. Welcome. I am here with Robyn Gobbel. I'm so excited you're here, Robyn. Welcome.
Thanks for inviting me. It'll be really fun to spend the morning with you.
I have always loved our intersections and conversations, so this will be a good one. We're going to talk about how we talk to our kids about their brains. But before we get into the meaty part, I want to get to know you a little bit. So could you share with us a bit about yourself and how you got passionate in particular about supporting and empowering parents?
I would love to. I started as a psychotherapist like 20 years-ish ago, and really have always worked with the kids that, to just put it bluntly, like nobody else really wanted to. Or it's really a more accurate description would be nobody else really knew how to. And they were just overwhelmed like normal humans get when they're faced with something they don't really know how to do. And so I was finding myself working with these really complex kids who had behaviors that nobody prepared us for, right? Which is exactly what the parents are saying. Like, nobody told me it would be like this. As a therapist, like, nobody told me it would be like this. And I think part of it's my temperament and my tenacity, and part of it was just some real practicalities of there was nowhere else to send these kids and families. Like, I was their last stop in an outpatient setting. And so I had to do something. Like, I had to try to figure out what was needed to help these kids and families, which is how I ultimately discovered like relational neuroscience and how that helped me make sense of and conceptualize like these most, what I would now say, like these most baffling, complex kids. And then I think because of being so grounded in relational neuroscience, the parents' behaviors started to make a whole lot more sense to me too. It's very common for professionals who want to work with kids to feel pretty overwhelmed by working with their parents. And I think in my deep dive into behavior is just the parent behavior made a lot of sense to me too. And that's just where my passion ended up really blossoming, is seeing this overlooked population who really deserved so much support, but also feeling like I could make such bigger impact if I connected with and supported and focused on the parents.
I love that you recognized such a need and that you felt called to step into it. And also that you went and found the resources, or if they didn't exist, you created them to help families. And I just want to highlight how much I love the way that you've brought together the cutting edge science and the everyday realities of parents in your book. The title is Big Baffling Behaviors, and you talk a lot about this sense of confusion and fear that a lot of families have as they watch their kids struggle. Can you share some of the underlying reasons that you've discovered in your journey contribute to these big behaviors and why they're so baffling to the parents?
I didn't set out to use the word baffling and make that my word. It just happened to be a word that folks were really resonating with. And what I have found are basically two reasons folks resonate. One, they have kids who's what I would say have like really vulnerable nervous systems, very sensitized stress response systems. And so they are having behaviors or reactions to legitimate stressors. It's just that the reactions feel so disproportionate to what we are seeing on the outside. For that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, or that shouldn't be that stressful. Or there's a perceived enormous mismatch. Now, I believe that there is no mismatch, that like folks are having a reaction that's completely in line with what their inner experience is. But that doesn't change it on the outside looking in. It feels very confusing. Like, why are we having such an enormous response or behavior to what we might objectively call a relatively small problem? So that's one reason. And that's just leaving parents feeling so like confused. The parenting strategies that are so commonly talked about aren't quote unquote working. But then the other reason that I see parents really resonate with or use the word baffling is what is my dominant area of expertise, which is working with kids who have had complex developmental or attachment trauma. And when kids are hurt inside the connection or the attachment experience, the impact that has on the nervous system can lead to these behaviors that, again, parents are calling really baffling. So I tend to see parents in kind of one or both of those categories, either a big mismatch or their kids have had like connection and safety tied together in their nervous system with not being safe.
Yes. This is why I love our conversations, because you bring this expertise in trauma work, and my field is more in the highly sensitized nervous systems because of neurodiversity. And yet there is so much commonality and overlap. Like you said, the approaches, the understanding of the brain, it's the same. I want to talk about not how we talk to kids about their brains, but why we talk to kids about their brains. Why is it so important? Why do you recommend, or why do you teach parents all the time how to do this translation work?
There's really good science that shows that when we understand the mechanism behind our behaviors, our own nervous system really shifts away from feeling as though we're totally out of control of this mysterious process to feeling as though we have some awareness and some understanding, and it helps us feel a lot more empowered, like there might be something that we could possibly do to shift. And so that's an important feeling, like feeling as though you have some agency and a sense of empowerment over your own being is really important for our mental health. It also de-shames our behaviors. Most of the kids that I work with, and probably you too and your listeners, are getting a lot of very negative feedback. Some of it's very overt, and some of it is a lot more covert. People meaning well, even still have maybe a look on their face of disdain or frustration or criticism. And kids are internalizing all of that in the way that their kid brain is supposed to, which is typically something like, oh, I'm a bad kid, right? Or no matter what I do, I'm always disappointing people, or I'm somebody who's always frustrating to other people. And that is, of course, just devastating for kids' mental health and their beliefs about themselves. But it also starts to impact all other kinds of aspects of their life. It impacts their relationships. It impacts all parts of their lives as they grow and develop. And so I really want all people, kids and adults, to have some very basic, we don't need to be neuroscientists here, but have some very basic understanding of the mechanism of behavior, especially because most of us learned something that we no longer know is terribly accurate. Mm-hmm. And when we have an understanding of why we're behaving the way that we're behaving, we don't excuse bad behavior. We shift to understanding and compassion. And if the behavior does need to change, and they don't all, but if the behavior does need to change, having some understanding and compassion is really a prerequisite for any change to be possible.
I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what we inherited as how behavior works versus how we know that to be false. Do you mind giving a little synopsis of that?
For the most part, a lot of us have been led to believe that behavior is something that's always inside our conscious control and a reflection of our character, right? That bad behavior means I made that behavior. I did that behavior with a choice, and it's because I have less than ideal character. Then there is also a piece I really can't speak to, which is how some of us have also ideas that are based in our faith or our religion about behavior. And what that ends up meaning is now we're adults who have been parented this way. And then those of us who are professionals, we went to school to learn about behavior. And there's these big assumptions made that, again, bad behavior equals being a bad person. And if I wanted to behave differently, I could if I tried hard enough. And since I'm not behaving differently, it means I don't want to. I'm not trying hard enough. And again, now we make that now that becomes a character assessment. And what we know is that's just really not true at all. Very little of our behavior is in our conscious control. Like shockingly little of our behavior is in our conscious control.
Let's dive into the frameworks that you do have for understanding how our brains are leading to our behaviors. So talk to me about the owl, the watchdog, and the possum.
So I, because of being a play therapist, needed to take and integrate all of my understanding of relational neuroscience and behavior and offer that up to kids in a way that was useful or helpful to kids. And actually, in most ways, I actually would say I didn't really develop all of this myself. This was co-created between me and like the hundreds and hundreds of kids that have been in my office and really mostly led by them. And so I took what I was noticing happening and brought some of the science to it and ultimately started to give some language to these three different pathways in the brain and in the autonomic nervous system. I called one the owl brain or the owl pathway, the watchdog brain and the watchdog pathway, and then the possum brain or the possum pathway. And the easiest way to describe it would to say it largely overlaps with Dr. Steve Porges's polyvagal theory. And I've mixed that together with Dr. Bruce Perry's neurosequential model of therapeutics to recognize that based on what Dr. Porges would say, perceived level of safety or threat at any moment, and then based on I would say like the strength or resilience of our stress response system, humans are constantly shifting onto different pathways, which is, again, really describing the autonomic nervous system. So when I'm neuroseving predominantly safety, my body can rest onto what I would call the owl pathway. It's Dr. Porges's ventral vagal complex. And the owl is feeling safe and is open and available for connection. Now, what I do want to say, especially knowing the folks who are going to be tuning in, is that connection is not something that we can behaviorally define. And we do have to be real careful about that when we're thinking about trying to grow maybe our kids' owl pathway so that they can have more opportunities to feel safe when they are safe, that we do want to make really sure that we're not projecting onto that some kind of like neurotypical ideas about what connection or connection-based behavior is. Safety, connection, and the owl pathway then emerges and gets to be in charge. And what we know about the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system is that it's good for our bodies. It's good for our physical health, for us to spend a lot of time in having our parasympathetic side of our autonomic nervous system be in charge. It's good for us. Then we have these two other pathways that can be engaged when we're detecting danger or life threat. And the watchdog pathway is the pathway of energy and activation and mobilization. So the watchdog pathway has energy in our arms and our legs. And if we're neuroreceiving danger, the watchdog pathway is helping us fight or flee because we've got energy in our arms and our legs and sometimes our mouths. I like to notice that part too. Sometimes the watchdog energy comes from lots of extra verbal energy.
Question.
And then the possum pathway is about preserving energy in the face of like life threat. So we see the possum pathway bring behaviors that we would maybe characterize as like collapse behaviors. So instead of mobilizing energy, we see like conserving or preserving energy, and our energy leaves our arms and our legs. It really decreases, moves into our viscera. We tend to even have a stance where we're protecting our head when we're on that possum pathway. So these are 3 autonomic nervous system states that I didn't make up. I just gave playful language to them because what I found was, one, it helped kids understand themselves a little bit better. It helps them experience their behaviors that come from like the watchdog or the possum pathway, the ones that they're usually getting in trouble for. It helped them shift their understanding into those behaviors being protective. And then it starts to shift into creating the capacity to in a way build relationship with these parts of ourselves. So instead of shaming or criticizing or trying to get rid of, as we use this playful metaphor, it helps us in a way bring these parts closer, be more curious, have some compassion, and kind of shift away from the stance of I'm trying to get rid of this part of me, but instead I'm trying to understand this part of me and allow this part of me to only have to work as hard as it needs to. Like, I don't want to get rid of the watchdog. I don't want to get rid of the possum. But a lot of the kids I work with have like really overzealous watchdogs, really overzealous possums. And the truth, there's just no way around the fact that's really hard physiologically on our bodies and our nervous systems. And so I work with kids and families, again, not on getting rid of those parts of us, but on helping them feel safe when they are safe and only having to like spring into action when they really need to.
How do you understand masking? We have a lot of autistic and especially PDA families here. How do you understand masking in terms of these 3 nervous system states?
What I would talk about masking is that I think masking can exist both as a watchdog behavior and as a possum behavior. There's an aspect of masking that at times certainly is very much, It's very much powered by sympathetic activation. And it feels very much like, I will do and be anything and just tell me what it is and I'll do it and I'll do it and I'll do it. And then there is an aspect of masking that I think is even more confusing, which I would put more on the possum pathway, because it involves really more of a dissociation from self. So the possum is that lower energy and starting to disconnect. And there's an aspect of masking that is, I am going to disconnect from self, essentially abandon my relationship to myself in order to prioritize my safety here in this experience.
It can be really challenging for parents to impose any kind of system or therapists. My own kids have done zones of regulation at the occupational therapist so many times, and it is thoroughly rejected because it's not their system. How do you incorporate this kind of knowledge into a family system without having the system itself become a threat to their children?
I start with, in a way that I think sometimes can frustrate people, but there's a method to my madness here, which is I do really hit the neuroscience with parents. I want parents to be able to take only what they need to know. Parents don't need to go out and learn all the things that I've spent my professional career learning. They can if they want to, but they don't need to. So I want to help parents learn just as much as they need to, that they can do exactly that. Shift out of my metaphor. It's also why I don't emphasize teaching parenting tools or techniques either, right? I like to help people kind of stuff their toolbox full of options. But ultimately, what I want to do is help people understand what's happening in the autonomic nervous system. What does this behavior maybe possibly suggest? We're always just guessing. And based on that, what might we want to offer that could be helpful or supportive to our kids, not changing their behavior, but to feeling safer in their bodies and in the world. Let's really understand the science that the metaphor is based on. And then I usually will talk to parents about how they could start incorporating this language just in regular everyday life that doesn't feel like teaching, which is also a big part of how I would do it with most kids in the therapy room too. I might talk about my own watchdog brain, and I want to make sure I'm doing it super authentically, with no hidden objective to teach, but just a really authentic, oh my gosh, today on my way to work, there was this huge traffic jam. I was already running late, and I just noticed that my watchdog brain was starting to really come out. My heart was pounding, and I was like, come on, people, just go, right? I was feeling all this intense watchdog energy. And so I'm teaching parents how to start to use descriptions of themselves. And if the parents find that watchdog, owl, possum language works for them, cool, let's run with that. If it doesn't, I'll work with them on finding other metaphors. Some families prefer to use the actual science. They might say, oh, on my way to work today, I was getting so sympathetically activated and feeling so threatened. And my arms and legs just wanted me to run away from the situation. It was so stressful. I might just use the actual science.
I want to talk about the long-term vision of this process of getting to know our brains, becoming more fluent in our own nervous system energy, and bringing that out into the world with the people we love. What do you see as the long-term hopeful impact of giving kids these tools to understand themselves?
We can look at that from a micro and a macro perspective. The long-term kind of micro for these kids perspective is to be able to be in the world in the way that, again, is authentic, that honors their true authentic selves, gives them understanding of who they are without shame, right? There's nothing wrong with this particular nervous system. And we would only even want to work to change it if it felt like there were negative repercussions from it. And I think that's so empowering. And the more that we help kids then become adults who are okay with themselves and who they are and how they show up in the world, that, first of all, that's wonderful for that child as they become an adult. If that child parents, and I think about the generational impact that can have. And I also just think about the way folks show up in the world a little bit differently, because there's no way you can learn about your own brain and body and nervous system and not eventually see other people through that lens too. Mm-hmm. And that changes how we are relationally. That actually allows us to set much better boundaries with people, much better compassionate boundaries. So I feel like there's big picture impact that we have the potential to make as well for our kids as they become adults, and all the humans that we all touch or interact with. How I interact with people is different now than it used to be. Not just myself, but other people. And I really do believe that matters for a global sense of our threat responses.
Yeah. I think of it as being macro peace building work on a very micro level.
Yeah. Yeah.
For every person that we love into healing, we send another unit of change into the world that can have massive ripple effects throughout their lifetime.
I agree.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you for giving us tools to do that. And for all of the parents and families who've walked in your door and finally found a compassionate heart and mind to see them and love them. I just want to thank you for what you do and for showing up yet again today to give us your wisdom. Thank you, Robyn.
You're so welcome.
If this podcast is speaking to your soul, you can subscribe through wherever you get your own podcasts. Even better, if you feel the nudge, head on over to Apple Podcasts in particular and leave us a review. It's such a helpful way for new people to also get to experience what this podcast wants to bring into their lives. I'm Amanda. Remember, it takes great strength to let things go. I'll see you next week.